All right, today we're going to learn about the end of this two interesting episodes that occur at the end of this week's Torah portion, Shalach, or to be more exact, one episode and one commandment. The episode is the Mekoshesh Eitzim, the Jew that was gathering, or that he was picking, or he was carrying. We'll learn. We'll learn the different opinions of what it was, but in any case, he was deliberately transgressing Shabbat, and he was stoned to death. First person to transgress Shabbat, first person to be stoned to death. And then after that is the commandment of Tzitzit, to put strings on the corner of your garments with one string that's blue. Even though nowadays we don't have the blue one, we'll talk about that. It still is a commandment. So let's get on with it. Here we go. Vayeyu b'nei Israel, and the Jewish people were b'midbar, in the desert. Vayimtzu ish, and they found a person mikoshesh eitzim, that was gathering up, carrying, we'll see, wood b'yom Shabbat, on the day of Shabbat. Why does it have to tell us the Jewish people in the desert? Of course we know they were in the desert, right? They got out of Egypt. They had nowhere else to go. Where could they be? In the desert. They didn't go into the land of Israel yet. Of course they were in the desert. We're going to deal with this problem. The Jewish people were in the desert, and they found a person that was doing the sin with wood on the day of Shabbat. Why does it tell us that he's on the day of Shabbat? Let's look at Rashi. Big and Utam Shel Yisrael. This talks about, this is for the disgrace of the Jewish people. The Torah tells us a disgraceful thing about the Jewish people. Shelo shamru el Shabbat rishona. They only kept the first Shabbat in the desert. Ubishniya, and the second one, Boze v'chalala. And on the second Shabbat, they were there. This person came. Oh, there's a big question about what does it mean the first Shabbat? What is the second Shabbat? It couldn't be before the Torah was given, because before the Torah was given, there was no real commandment from God to the Jewish people. They knew that there was a law. It says that before that, they also received the law of Shabbat. And even it says in Egypt, the Jewish people didn't. They kept the Shabbat. But exactly what Shabbat was this? So it says this is the first Shabbat after the Torah was given, which means it's going back a long way. This is not in the proper order. Some people say, no, this is the first Shabbat after the sin of the Meraglim, of the spies. And why that this person who defiled the Shabbat, some people say, we'll see, some people say it's Tzalafchad. Tzalafchad is going to be mentioned again later in the Torah, and that Tzalafchad died. It says that he died in the desert, not from his own sin. He didn't die with the Jews that went against Moshe, and the Torah, the Jews that refused to go in the land of Israel. Some people say it's Tzalafchad. We'll see what this is. If you remember, if you ever read this before, so the daughters of Tzalafchad, they came and demanded from Moses, what should they do with the inheritance of their father? Okay, some people say it's Tzalafchad. And some people say that he did it in order to sanctify God's name, that as soon as Moses told the Jews they weren't going to go into the land of Israel, so there were some people saying, well, maybe none of the commandments apply anymore. I mean, the commandments really only apply in their full sense when the Jews are in Israel. So now God is telling the Jews, after the sin of the spies that we just finished learning about, that they're not going to go into the land of Israel, they're going to die in the desert. So they said, well, maybe there's no more Torah, maybe there's no punishments or whatever. So he deliberately defiled the Shabbat with the intention of getting punished, so that everyone would see that the laws and the punishments, etc., are still in effect, even though they're not going to go into the land of Israel. They're going to wander around for 40 years. That's why this story comes right after that. That's what some people say. Let's look at some of the comments. So here we have, let's look at the Ohr HaChaiam. What does it have to tell you? Kasha, I got a question. Ohr HaChaiam, Reb Chaim ben Atar. Why does the Torah have to tell us that the Jewish people were in the desert? Of course they were in the desert. So it's explained what it says in the Gemara in Shabbat. There's a big argument about what was exactly the sin of this koshesh eitzim. Strange word, koshesh. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Mokoshesh eitzim, that he carried this wood 4 amos, like about 6 feet, in a public domain. Now that's a transgression on Shabbat. You're not allowed to carry anything in your hands for, let's say, 6 feet in a public domain. Now, what's a public domain? So here, this is the big problem. What is a public domain? Desert is not a public domain. According to the Torah, that's called what's called a makom patur, and there's no problem carrying anything as much as you want to in a desert from the Torah. But the rabbis said that you can't carry in a desert. Other places they called it a Carmelite. And of course, as we know, the rabbis are commanded from the Torah to make these laws. But nevertheless, before the rabbis made it, it was not forbidden to carry 4 amos in a desert. But because it says the Jews were in the desert, so the Jews made this into a public domain. Here it says in the Gemara in Shabbos, it says, Tana Rabbanan, the rabbi said, a sartian, a platian, etc. This is what's called a public domain. And they asked the question in the Shas, how can it possibly be? The desert, what about the desert? The desert is also called a public domain. And it says, no, this is only the Jews. When the Jews are there in the desert, it's called a public domain. So that now answers the question, because the Jews were there. It says, Bnei Yisrael b'midbar, because the Jews were in the desert. So therefore, that transforms the desert into what's called a public domain, or Reshut HaRabim. And therefore, it was forbidden for him to carry, and he did. And there's another opinion that says that, here we go, the Koshesh Eitzim, he was a Tolesh. This crime was not that he that he carried, but the crime was that he uprooted this wood. He uprooted some small trees or whatever. Now that's forbidden. You can't uproot small trees. And that's what he did. Asked the question, what side? And the question is what? Halo Amru Rabbasim, the rabbis say in the laws of covering up blood, if you slaughter a chicken or a deer, you have to cover the blood. And you have to cover the blood with some sort of substance that you can grow, that something will grow in it. It says, what about covering up blood with the sand from the desert? No good. Why? Because it's salty, whatever it is. Nothing grows there. If nothing grows there, so how can it be that this Mekash is that he uprooted trees in the desert? Nothing grows in the desert. So that's why it says that the Jews were there. When the Jews were there, there was the well of Miriam that went along with them. Bereshel Miriam, it would mashke, this would the well of Miriam, it would go and irrigate the desert. And that's why there could be trees there, and he could uproot the trees. We're talking here about the Makoshesh Eitzim and what was the crime of the Makoshesh Eitzim. And according to one opinion, that he carried 4 amos and Reshut HaRabim. And the Gemara asks 1 second, the desert is a Reshut HaRabim? The desert is not Reshut. It says, yes, it is. When the Jews are there, it's called a public domain. That's why, same thing, there's another opinion that was his crime was not carrying. His crime was that he uprooted. He pulled out a few trees from the ground. It says in the Gemara that the sand in the desert doesn't grow anything. So that's why it says the Jewish people were in the desert. Vayiyu Bnei Yisrael b'midbar. First glance, it's not necessary to say they were in the desert. Everybody knows they were there. But because the Jews were there, as there was the well of Miriam that irrigated the land, and therefore there could grow there. There's another opinion that says, also Rav Acha Ber Yaakov, he said, nah, the crime of salaf of the koshesh eitzim. Some people say that's salaf chad. We'll do it in a minute. That his crime was mamar. He gathered them together. He gathered them, made a bundle. You're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. So it's also the same thing. What did he get? Sticks to bundle on Shabbos. So the answer is the Jews were in the desert, and things grew up when the Jews were there. Things grew up in the desert. It says, "Vayimtzu ish koshesh etzim." They found a person. They found a person that was transgressing the Shabbos. It says, "Omer lashon mitzia," like the rabbis say. Moshe said, "Let's go out and see if there is somebody. Let's go out and look, search if there's somebody that's defiling the Shabbos." Therefore, it says, "Vayimtzu," like it says, "Vayivakesha davar vayimotzei." They searched and they found. All right, so here's an interesting thing. It says, well, what was that? And we're going to get to this also. It's going to repeat this idea again. What comes after the story about the Makoshesh Eitzim? The commandment over here about tzitzis. Amartlan tzitzit. The whole commandment of tzitzit. What's the connection between them? So the Ohr HaChaiam says like this. Hiktim zikron maaseh kodem zikron hayom. It says, they found a person gathering up wood on the day of Shabbat. It doesn't say Vayiyu b'nei Israel b'yom Shabbat, and they found him gathering wood. First he did it, and then he remembered it was Shabbat, right? So he was sort of, innocent. He didn't really know it was Shabbat, let's say. But then afterwards, first of all, he did the deed, and then he found out it was Shabbat. The only problem is that afterwards it says and they found him koshesh eitzim. Then it says afterwards that he was gathering wood together, or whatever he was doing. So in other words, he did the crime, then he found out about it, then it seems that he did the crime again. So that's what the Ohr HaChaiam wants to say over here. So we learn from this that they found him on the day of Shabbat. What does it mean? It means when it says that Makashesh Eitzim b'yom Shabbat, then afterwards it says Shabbat is after the Koshesh Eitzim. So this seems that, Lomer, to tell you, Shalom nitalem mimenu Shabbat kasha osam ma'aseh. I'm sorry, let's start from the beginning. It starts off what he did first before it says Shabbat, and it doesn't say Shabbat first, to tell you, Shalom nitalem mimenu Shabbat kasha osam ma'aseh. Because that would tell us that maybe Shabbat was hidden from him when he did the deed. So he says, no, if it would have said Shabbat first, then we would understand that they found him on Yom Shabbat. What does it mean that they knew it was Shabbat? But because it said that he was gathering wood together first and then Yom Shabbat, so Shabbat comes after his deed. So it comes out that, right, Elamakoshesh sheyodea ki Shabbathu. This seems to imply that maybe he knew it was Shabbat when he did it. They found him gathering up wood, and all the time he was gathering up wood, he knew it was Shabbat. Oh, yes? Well, not exactly. Let's see. It says no. How do we know that he knew it was Shabbat? Because it says afterwards, Mekoshesh Eitzim. Shabbat Omar comes to tell us that after they told him that it was Shabbat, then he went back and gathered the wood together. So first of all, he did the deed. He didn't know it was Shabbat. And if you might think that maybe he did know it was Shabbat, right? Maybe it was Shabbat. So he verified that fact because after they told him, he did it again. That's why it says the second time, Lahodia shalo hayata lo shagagat malacha. He didn't have any, how do you say, lack of knowledge. He knew what he was doing. Elahodio, they let him know that this was a malacha and he was guilty about it. And that's what it says, Mokesh, that he knew that he was doing something forbidden. That's why it was Zadon Shabbat and Zadon Malacha. He knew it was Shabbat and he knew it was forbidden. This is what's called a shogeg. Shogeg means that you know what you're doing, but either you don't know that the deed is forbidden, or you don't know you're doing it at a forbidden time. In other words, the smoking a cigarette on Shabbat. So some people say, I know it's Shabbat, but I didn't know it was forbidden to smoke a cigarette. And some people would say, I know it's forbidden to smoke a cigarette on Shabbat, but I didn't know today is Shabbat. So therefore, by him, it was Zad on Shabbat and Zad Moach. Here's an interesting one over here about the Tzitzit. Look what he says. Omer, the rabbis say, Il Malay Shom Yisrael, if the Jews would just keep this second Shabbat, Lo Sholta B'hem Uma, no nation would be able to rule over them. Now the Jews received the Shabbat, they received the Torah on Shabbat, right? So it must be that this must be a Shabbat after that, or maybe it was 2 Shabbats after that. In any case, the Jews did keep one Shabbat after they found it was forbidden. And the second Shabbat they didn't keep. He was the one that transgressed it. It says, if the Jews would just keep of the second Shabbat, as no nation would be able to rule over them. How did they know that this was the second Shabbat? How do they know? The Ketziva says, Vayiyu, and it was, Vayimtsu'u, and they found him, Tokef immediately, Lahavaya Shinitztabu. In other words, immediately after they were commanded, and they were commanded with the Shabbat, they found him that he was kosher eitzim. That's what he wants to say. Vayiyu, it was immediately. Man alone, how do you know that this Makoshes Eitzim was Tzalafchad? Some people say it was Tzalafchad. So again, like Tzalafchad was the person who his daughters came to Moshe and they said, our father died in the desert and he wasn't part of the people of Korach and he didn't die one of the spies. He died from his own sin. So they say, who was the one that died of his own sin? Well, we don't know. Maybe it's Tzalafchad died from his own sin. This must be the sin. This is, how do you know this was the sin? Because it says Makoshes Eitzim b'Yom HaShabbat. Eitzim, the word Ayin, Tzadik, Yud Mem, with the 2 times the biyom, it comes out in the Gematria Tzalafchad. Okay, you can count it and see. Why is this idea of the Kosher Eitzim right before Tzitzit? Because at the time when the Makoshesh Eitzim did this transgression of Shabbat, so Moshe said in front of God, Ribbono Shalom, it says in Tefillin that the Torah will be in your mouth, and by means of, you put on Tefillin so that you'll always remember the Torah. But and I commanded not to put Tefillin on Shabbat. No son. If he would put on tefillin, then he would remember all the commandments and maybe he wouldn't have transgressed the Shabbat. So, what do you want from the Jewish people? You don't allow them to wear tefillin. There's nothing to remind them about Shabbat. Said God, you got a good point. I am now going to make a commandment. One commandment that by means of this, they're going to remember all the commandments, just like they do with tefillin. And what is it going to be? But this commandment will be done on Shabbat, not like tefillin. And what is it? Tzitzit. And like I said, I saw some other place that this Tzalafchad, he deliberately defiled the Shabbat in order to prove that the commandments, even though the Jewish people were punished by God not to go into the land of Israel, and there were some Jews that said, okay, maybe there's no more, the commandments aren't relevant to us now because we're not going to go in the land of Israel, and the commandments are only fully relevant in the land of Israel. So Tzalafchad deliberately defiled the Shabbat so that he would get punished and killed. That's what somebody said. I read it somewhere. Okay, so there came the people who found Tzalafchad gathering wood or picking wood or carrying wood or whatever he was doing. They went to Moshe and Aaron and all of the congregation. And Shehitrubo velo hiniach lemakoshesh. They warned him and they didn't allow him to do it anymore. Av shimtzau v'hatrubo. Even though that they did find him and they warned him already, but nevertheless they stopped him. Amotzi also, they took him, they stopped him from doing his sin. They put him in jail. Kilo Perish, because they didn't know what to do. But the Rebbe learned the whole thing from this, that there's really no punishment in the Torah explicitly of jail. Jail is no punishment. And only if you don't know what the law is. It says so there's certain times a person is, but not in just keeping a person in jail for no reason. Just keeping in jail for so the Rebbe said if people are already going to go to jail, so there has to be more of an educational system over there to teach them about God. Okay. Nobody knew what to do. They didn't know what, says Rashi, they didn't know what death punishment. They knew that it was punishable by death. It says it in the 10 Commandments. But they didn't know what they didn't know what death to give him. There's even a more, it says Mot Yamut. Usually when it says Mot Yamut, it means that is this here? Oh, here this is it. Here it says, because it says it's not explaining what to do. They knew it says Mechalaleha Mot Yamut. It says in the 10 Commandments that a person who defiles the Shabbat will die. They knew that the punishment was death, but they didn't know which death it was. Now, usually when it says, there's another place where it says, Parshat Emor, it says that they didn't know if he was going to be killed or not. So you can say, listen, maybe the question is like this. Anytime it says in the Torah, Mot Yamut, he's going to die, this is always chenek. It's always choking. It's one of the 4 ways that we're killed for punishment of death. And there's only certain crimes that are each crime has its own different way of getting killed. And it's all according to Kabbalah and etc. So it says in Parshas Emor about Shabbat, it says that ordinary, when it just says a person will die, it means Mod Yamud, it means that a person will be choked to death. So if so, what do you mean they didn't know what the punishment was? Because that was the doubt to them, because a Mechal Shabbat, they didn't know it was the same punishment as idolatry. And the punishment for idolatry is stoning. The skila, lokach. Therefore, that's where they had the doubt. And they knew the holiness of Shabbat. And then, in fact, that's the law. A person who defiles Shabbat, it's the same thing as idolatry. And one big repercussion from that is that a person who, God forbid, worships idols, right? He goes to church or whatever, he cannot be a shochet. He can't slaughter. And it's the same thing a person that doesn't keep Shabbat. Other crimes, God forbid, a person does other crimes, he can be a shochet. But not idolatry, because it's the same thing. So that was their question. What exactly was the punishment? Is it, as it says in the Torah, Mod Yamot, that he should be choked? Or maybe it's like idolatry, and it ends up that it is, that the punishment for not keeping Shabbat is getting stoned. Now, you have to remember that it was like, 40 years or something like that, before the destruction of the Second Temple, there was already no death punishment. 40 years, I think. I have to read over the 40 years, I think it says. 40 years before the Second. In other words, there hasn't been any death punishment in Israel, official death punishment, for 2,000 years about. And Rabbi Akiva and the others, they said that it's a Mishnah in Makot. It says that a court that killed somebody once every 7 years was called a hanging court, called a Beit Din Chablanit. So it was very, very rare, almost impossible to kill anybody. Rabbi Akiva said, if I was a judge in the time of the Sanhedrin when there was a death penalty, no one would ever die. I'd always find a way. The witnesses weren't right, or they didn't warn him properly, or he didn't answer properly. Anyway, so Moshe said, take him out and stone him with stones. Call Eidah, all of the congregation, outside of the camp. Here he says, from this we know that outside of the camp, it says, they took him outside. From here we learned that the place where they used to stone people to death, stoning people to death means they used to push a person off of a high place. And that's also called stoning. Yoreh. So they would throw a big rock on his chest, and then after that they would, if he wasn't dead, then they would stone. Therefore, this place of stoning is outside of the town, far away from the court. Good, sad story. There it is. Here we have. Vayotzi they did, and they killed him, just like God commanded Haragima. They stoned him. Vayomer Hashem Moshe, God said to Moses, Daber ben Israel, speak to the Jewish people and say to them, they should make tzitzis on the corner of their garments for the generations, and they should put on these tzitzis on the corner, and they should put on the tzitzis on the corner one string of techelet. In other words, dye one of these strings blue. Also, tzitzit says Rashi. Why are they called tzitzit? What a strange name, tzitzit, because of this string, patilim, because of these strings that are hanging on it. Like tzitzit roshi, like the strands, the like hairs, strands of my hair, tzitzit roshi. It says in Ezekiel. That's one explanation. Tzitzit from the language to peek, to look. Tzitzit al shem riyah, like seeing. Natzitz min harachim, like it says in the Song of Songs. My beloved is looking at me from the cracks in the wall. One of the strings has to be techelet. There's a tseva yarok. It's a greenish color, which comes from a chalazon, some sort of a snail. Some people say they found it. There was the Rabbi of Rudzin said that he found it, and he has really good proofs. The fact is, he has really very strong proofs that what he found is this sort of shellfish that puts out a blue. How many shellfish that put out blue color are there, right? And he found that it really meets all the criterion. The only problem is the Arizal and others. They said that only when Mashiach comes will there be blue on the tzitzis. That's what he says. But in any case, the tzitzis are good without this blue on it. And even if the blue color, even if they're wrong, so it doesn't disqualify the tzitzis by putting the blue on it. So those who want to put on the blue can do so. Let's look at the Bal HaTurim over here. We have interesting tzitzis. What it says, God said, I want that the Jewish people should be wrapped up in white like the angels. It says the angels, it says, are levushi abadim. Just like you saw me, if you remember, we learned also in the vision of Ezekiel, the levushi abadim. Just like it says that God appeared wrapped up in his talit. Therefore, he said that they should put this blue stripe there, which the blue stripe is similar to the heaven and to the chair, the throne of glory of God. So in other words, wrapping yourself up in the talit, this is like wrapping yourself up in the heavens and the glory of the Lord. Tzitzit, what is tzitzit? Tzitzit and atbash. What's atbash? Atbash means there's the world is created with God's letters, right? So the letters are pretty powerful. You create the whole world from them. So there's a lot of different ways of combining these letters. We know there's gematrias, but you can also rearrange the letters. And one of them is what's called atbash. You take the first letter of any aleph, which is the first letter of the alphabet, and you exchange it with the last letter. So if you see an aleph, any place you see the letter aleph, then you put in its place a tuf. And any place you see the letter base, so you put the second last letter there. That's shin. Let's see, 1 second. Just one moment. So in other words, you take the alphabet, the first letter and the last letter, and then the second letter with the second and last, etc., etc. Ad, bash, gar, dak. You exchange them. If you do this and exchange it in that way, you get the gematria, the numerical value of tzitzit comes out kisei, the throne. of God. How the Bal HaTurim knew this, I have no idea, but he just had a sense of knowing it. I mean, have you ever heard of, what was his name? I'll think about it in a second. Just one more. There was the rabbi, he escaped from Auschwitz, and he sawed a hole through the thing, through the cattle car that he was in, and he escaped, and he got out to England, etc. What am I telling this story before? Because he was a big expert in gematrias, and he could find letters, codes of the Torah. Amazing. What was his name? Oh yeah. How could I forget his name? That's terrible. Anyway, I'll remember it then. So there's some people that just have this amazing knack of just looking at a word and they can tell, if you rearrange the letters in such and such a way, you'll get this gematria and that. And that's what the Bal HaTurim did. The tzitzit are the gematria. Tzitzit are the gematria, numerical value of tzadkot, charity, and also the gematria of nisharim, of eagles, to tell you that if you're careful in the commandment of tzitzit, then you merit to see the Shekhinah, which the Shekhinah is called tzedek, that's tzadkot, and it says that also the future redemption, which God says, I'll carry you on kanfei nisharim. Interesting. Torah is interesting. Ohr HaChaiam. The Ohr HaChaiam HaKodesh says, because there's a commandment in this, sheyesh was also a maila, a good quality that what comes out from it. That says daber and omarta. Therefore, it says dibur v'amira. Also, it says that it has to be a commandment. The first knot that you make on the tefillin must be a commandment from the Torah, because it's permissible to put wool and linen together. Therefore, you can. Okay. Here we have the Ohr HaChaiam, Asu. Here we have some interesting Ohr HaChaiam. Let's see how much we can get done. Asulam. The reason it says Asulam tzitzis, Daber ben Israel, and speak to them, and they should make it. Why and vav? Why vav? So he says like this. Listen, this is very interesting. Why does it say and they should make tzitzis? Just say, speak to the Jewish people. They should make tzitzis. What does it mean? And they should make tzitzis. Because it says that I wrote in the pasuk Vayomer Moshe LaHashem, in the weekdays you put on tefillin, and this will remind us, right? Like we said before. And Moses said, "What about Shabbat when we don't put on tefillin?" So God said, "Well, you put on tzitzit on Shabbat." So therefore, you might think that either you put one or the other. On Shabbat you put on tzitzit. So there's a place to say that one mitzvah is in the place of the other one. When you put on tzitzit, you don't have to put on tefillin. In other words, if you want to put on tefillin, so you have enough of a memory, something to remind you, then you don't have to put on. If you want to put on tefillin, you put on. You want to put on tzitzis, you put those on without tefillin. And so it is in the other days. Therefore, that's why it says, and you should make tzitzit. In other words, an additional thing, in addition to the fact that you have Mosif shemitzvahs tefillin b'makom omeret, the commandment of tefillin, you don't take off the tefillin when you have tzitzis on. You have two. Vi means and it add on also the commandment of tzitzis also. And here's another one. Let's see, Ladoro Techem. Here's an interesting one. Why does it say you should put on tzitzis Ladoro Techem for your generations? Why? Because you might think that this is a commandment which you have to do. Shalom ba mitzvah zu ela lezikaron ha mitzvah kashiruoto. You might think that when do you need tzitzis? When there's a possibility that you'll forget. There's a possibility maybe you'll forget the other commandments. So you have to put this thing like tying a string around your finger. Tavo asvora, you might think that when there comes the holy generation in the days of the Mashiach, and everyone will remember all of the commandments, so then you won't need tzitzis. That's why it says L'dorotechem. For all generations, you have to put on tzitzis. The purpose of tzitzit are not just to remind you, even though that's what they do, but that's not their purpose. For all generations. Another thing it says, L'dorotechem, because on the tzitzis, there's two things. There's the white and there's the yellow. And the white exists all the time. But the yellow, there's sometimes when you can't find this shellfish, or you don't know what it is. So you might think that, okay, you can't find the shellfish, you can't color it blue, so then there's no commandment. I can't do it. Therefore, a person might say that I don't have to do it. That's why Hashem said, L'dorotechem. This comes before the tzitzit, before the blue, to tell you that the white has to be done the generation. So look what it says. Here it says, 1 second. Excuse me 1 second. Here. Daber ben Israel, and say that they should put on tzitzis on the corner of their garments, l'dorotam, for their generations. Now this is talking about the white tzitzis. And afterwards it says, v'natnu al tzitzis hakanaf b'teilit. You should put on the tzitzis that you have to do for all generations, you should put blue. In other words, the white you have to do for all generations. And if you can find blue, then you put the blue on. If not, you don't have to put it on. Nice? I think that's nice. Let's just do the last one over here because we are, thank God, running out of time. And it will be for you for tzitzis, and you will see them and you will remember all the commandments of God. Rashi explains very nicely, and you will not go after your heart and after your eyes. Now, this is a commandment. In fact, this is one of the 6 constant commandments that's at all times, all people in Israel, outside of Israel, men, women. There's 6 constant commandments. You ever heard this before? 6 constant commandments. You have to do every Jew has to do it all the time, no matter when, no matter where, male, female. What are the 6 commandments? They are to love God, to fear God, to believe in God, not to believe in anything else, right? Again, to love God, to fear God, to believe in God, not to believe in anything else, not to go after your eyes and your heart. And what's the 6th one? I forgot. Okay, forgot. I have to look and see. This is a forget day. What am I going to do? Forget the name of the rabbi. I forgot this. Okay. Good. You have to, says that, anyway, this is one of the 6 constant commandments that you have to do all the time. In fact, I'm going to tell you what they are in 1 second. Not to go after your eyes and your heart. Here we go. Very embarrassing that I don't remember what these 6 constant commandments are. It's written in the book, which is called Minchat Chinuch. It's called Minchat Chinuch, and this is the 6, 7 noise commandments. Okay, to love God, to fear God, to believe in God, not to believe in anything else, to believe in God, not to go after your eyes and your heart. And, okay, what are we going to do? I forgot the last one. So don't go after your eyes and your heart. Rashi says you have to remember all the commandments of God. You remember the tzitzit are, tzitzit is 600. 90 and 10, 90 and 10, and 400. That's 600. There's 8 strands. 8 strands and 5 knots are on every single corner. So that comes out to be altogether 613. 8 strands and 5 knots. That's 13. So it comes out to be 613 altogether. And then you won't go after your heart and your mind, like it says, mitur or it's lo taturu. This is the whole Torah portion of the spies. So you shouldn't go after your eyes, which are already always spying around looking for things. Halev ve'anayim hem meraglim leguf. It says that the eyes and the heart, they are the spies, they are the scouts of the body. And they, how do you say, entice people to do sins. The eye sees, the heart desires, and the body does what it's supposed to do. That's what it says. Don't look at the tzitzis and don't go after your heart and after your eyes. Your eyes should be for the tzitzis and for an interesting thing, and I wanted to do this, but I am God that took you out of Egypt, that took you out from the land of Egypt to be for you for a God. I am your God. Ani Hashem Elokechem. I am your God. I am your God. Why twice? So it says, I am your God. This is, first of all, that God helps us to serve him, takes us out of Egypt. And after we go out of Egypt and we serve God, then God gives us an additional blessing. I am God, your God. And this is a second time in a revealed way. This is talking more about in the days of the Mashiach, when everyone will see that God is our God. It's a pretty long one, which we are not going to get to, God willing, next week. Okay, so tomorrow we'll finish the Sikh of the Rebbe that we started today. And I'll remember what the sixth thing, the constant thing is. I mean, it's always on my mind, but I can't suddenly just jump from it. And also remember the rabbi that is the rabbi with the codes of the Torah. Can't remember. All right, my friends, God bless you all. Have a good day with Mashiach now, and see you tomorrow at 8:15 in the morning. And I'll remember all those things which temporarily are hidden from me. Shalom uvracha.